I am the White Dragon.
And this is Sir Briz.
And you're listening to the Beyond Unreal Podcast, episode 17. It is great to be back after such a long break.
Yes, it was a long vacation.
Yes. So, a couple of things to start out with. First of all, we have over 500 subscribers.
Woohoo!
So, big thanks to everybody helping us make this happen. It's a lot of work every week to do this, and we really appreciate the support.
Yep.
Next thing is, the mothership is up.
Yes, we have a new server running. You can play the game on it.
Yes. So we've had a mothership server in all of the UT games. So we're really glad to bring it back. And with the mothership, we will also be bringing back our weekend event, Frag BU. John Doe 41 is putting it together as usual, and there will be a post up on the forum that we will link to in our video.
Yep, we just couldn't get it set up for this week.
Yes.
There were quite a few changes in the build this week, so we weren't sure if the server was going to be up and ready or whatnot this week, and it turned out that it was ready, but we just didn't have time to set up the event and everything this time. So next week.
Yep. So let's get into the changes, and that's the first change, and it's been 2 weeks, but basically what happened was last week they broke everything.
Yep.
Rush's launcher relies on a certain plugin to work, and there's this whole system that they had set up to build it correctly and build the server and everything, and some of the things that Epic did broke it. You know, it was just all messed up. No, not a whole lot of playtesting happened last week because of this.
Yeah. I mean, the server browser had a bunch of problems. The server build had a bunch of problems. The launcher didn't work. And I think that a lot of people just don't like to go in-game to see if people are playing. And that was a huge factor. There really wasn't that many populated servers. In fact, last week, the most played game type was Instagib.
Yeah.
And I made the comment last week, oh man, Instagib is already taking over ED4.
Yes.
But this week, so far, since the build came out a few hours ago, according to our time, several of the normal weapon servers have been populated, and lots of people seem like they're playing. And that's without the build having spread very far quite yet.
Yeah, we already had people on their mothership, so... Yeah, they moved over to a modular build, and that fixed a lot of problems. So
yeah.
Hopefully that doesn't happen again. It also helps us put custom content on. So, for instance, Timmy has a domination game type, which is just great. It's the best domination of any UT game, in my opinion, so far. You should definitely check that out if you can.
And we will try to have that available to play at some point. But so far, I mean, just today, we haven't gotten a way to do that quite yet.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll have some footage.
Well, and the thing with this modular build, it does give a little bit more power on the servers. You can actually have game content separated into different folders and have the engine separate from that, and the engine can actually run multiple servers from those separate folders at the same time. This is all just part of their master server matchmaking system that they're working on.
Yeah.
But how that's actually going to pan out remains to be seen. Right now, what that means for people that are listening is that it's a little bit harder to run the game. Instead of running an Unreal Tournament.exe, you have to run a batch file that does more than just running an executable.
Yep. But in general, everything's fixed. So the issues with the server browser where not all of the servers were showing up, that's fixed. The launcher is fixed. Custom content is fixed.
Yep.
So good things all around. Let's go into the weapon changes. So they slowed down the rocket launcher. They slowed down the shock ball. And then they changed the refire time on the shock secondary.
So let's talk rockets first. A lot of people complained before that the rockets felt like they were too fast, but I don't know if the speed of the rocket projectile was the problem as much as how quickly you could fire the next rocket.
Yeah.
And part of the problem right now might have more to do with movement speed or whatever. The end result is you still have the problem where you can ping people back and forth with rockets, or you don't have as much of a downside from missing as you normally would because you can just readjust and have another rocket on its way quite quickly.
Yeah, exactly. By the time your opponent has recovered, the next rocket is going to be hitting them, and so they never really get a chance to actually put themselves in a position where they can fight back. I think it's particularly acute on Nick Test when they still had the boots. He took it out for this build. But when you're coming down on top of somebody, you just can't get away.
Yeah.
And you had like an unlimited supply of rockets. So they slowed it down a little bit, but we'll see how it goes. The thing is, when I was at the Epic playtest, I asked them about a lot of values on the weapons, and their answer every time was basically, you know what, we really haven't done a whole lot of tweaking on the weapons, and almost every property about them is likely to change.
Yeah.
They were still focused on movement, which I know comes as a shock to many people in the community, but they still want to make changes to it. They still want to work on roll. They still want to work on wall sliding and all these other things. So
yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up with, but there really hasn't been a lot of movement from them on it right now. They have been focusing more, it seems like, on getting the levels polished a little bit better, and
there's a little bit of house cleaning. Like they spent most of the week this time fixing the modular build, for instance.
The shock rifle, they did slow down the shock ball again, and they still have the problem with the shock ball where the hit radius is pretty large. You can miss the core itself by a little bit and still get the combo to activate. You can still run into the situation right now where somebody's in a room and you shoot 2 shock balls and you have plenty of time to figure out which one they're going to be by and shoot that one.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most serious problem with the way it is right now, but it is nice that you can shoot the shock ball sooner. That was a big problem with the rifle before.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always going to be mine laying. That's what I call it, mine laying, where you throw a bunch of balls out and watch them navigate and then hit the one that's closest to them. But it's just too easy to hit, in my opinion. So, yeah.
If you had to hit closer to the center every single time, then people would miss them all the time.
That might change the calculation completely if they change the hitbox on it. On the movement, so there was a pretty significant movement change, and that has to do with Z override. Before, if you were going up or down and you wall dodged, your Z momentum was preserved.
Yep.
After this change, it's only preserved if you're going up. So that basically means if you're doing a lift jump and you wall dodge, you'll continue to go soaring high in the air and be able to do all the amazing lift jumps that you can do in this game that I absolutely love. But something that people missed was being able to fall down a really long way and then dodge away.
Yeah. There are examples of lifts where you could fall down to the bottom of the lift and dodge and miss activating the lift.
You jump over the actual pad at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. There were good reasons to do that, but with the way that it was before, because your momentum was preserved, you would basically just dodge straight down into the lift and then get lifted up immediately.
You were like a rock, you were falling down either way.
Yep. So with the change that they made, the way it is right now, if you are not falling, then your momentum is preserved. If you're falling, then your momentum is overridden by the wall dodge that you do, whatever the impulse velocity and all that stuff, all the different properties of a wall dodge.
Right.
If you're falling fast enough that you would get hurt, right now what it's doing is it's conserving all of the damage that it would do, and then as soon as you stop falling, it applies all of that damage, which is interesting because you can get yourself into a scenario where there's, 200 plus damage to apply, and you're still alive, and then as soon as you hit the ground, you explode into a shower of gibs because it just applied 200 damage to you.
Yeah, so when you're falling and it's like 200 damage, it's not a big deal, but there seems to be some situations where wall dodging will actually hurt you, basically, rather than just letting yourself fall. My recollection is that in UT 2004, it applied the damage when you actually did the wall dodge.
Yep.
And that's where I would have expected to do it. Because then players know immediately that, hey, even if I've fallen a long way, when I do a wall dodge, I'm still going to take fall damage.
Yep.
So it's a more immediate indication of what's going to happen. I think that would be more clear.
Right now, it's pretty easy to run into a situation where you have 10 health left, and you fall down a lift and you try to wall dodge to save yourself, and you survive the wall dodge, but as soon as you hit the ground, you die.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just confusing. I mean, you think you saved yourself when you wall dodged, and the expectation is that you'll continue to stay alive, but the messaging there just doesn't work out. You die. You didn't actually save yourself. If you just died when you wall dodged, then you would understand. I fell too far, damage was applied, I got hurt.
Wall dodging doesn't mitigate fall damage.
Yep.
Yep. So moving on, weapon switch. So my favorite subject, the weapon put down time can now overlap with the reload time.
Yep. Yeah, and it is a significant change, but in actual scenarios, it doesn't play out very different. I mean, you're talking about most of the reload times are already fairly short. There's a few cases where you can switch away faster than you would have expected to, but it's only by 200 milliseconds maybe.
Well, so like, for instance, it's probably the biggest deal is going to be on the sniper rifle, right?
Yep.
But the issue is that the put down and pull up time on like the sniper rifle and the shock is already really long.
Yep.
I haven't looked at numbers, but it feels like it's almost twice as long as I would like to see like 2004 values.
Well,
so even though it was a pretty significant change to the mechanics and it was a good change, it really doesn't change the gameplay appreciably. Another change that they made recently was they added the player names to the enemies. So before you could only see the names of your friendlies, now you can see them on all of the players, which is great because I really use that to help me determine which targets I should go after first. If it's a death match, I'll always go after the weaker players first. If it's a CTF match, I'll usually try and hit their primary defender first because they're the biggest threat, right?
Yep.
The issue with it is that the HUD is just getting so cluttered now with messages and...
Yeah, so this is something that I brought up with some of the other mechanics that they've added because people keep saying things like, to message that better, they can add this to the HUD, and to message that better, they can add this to the HUD. The problem is that the more things that you add onto the player view, the more occluded the actual game is. You start getting into a scenario where you can't even play the game because there's so many messages here and there and everywhere. Not necessarily somewhere we're at, but it's something that's becoming a problem. You can't just add a whole bunch of things to the HUD to message this and to message that because you want to have as much of the view open to the player view. There are solutions to things like that. Like right now, the kill message is really quite large on the screen. In Quake Live, when you get a kill, there's a kind of a chime indicating you killed somebody, and that chime is great feedback for getting a kill.
Oh, it gives me tingles every time I get a kill. You feel good when you hear that sound.
It's true. I mean, we could do the same kind of thing in UT, have a sound that indicates you got a kill, and we wouldn't have to have such a large message on the HUD indicating every single kill. I mean, there's other benefits to things like that too, like if you shoot rockets right before you die, and those rockets end up killing the person, and you hear the chime, you don't have to see a big message while you're getting respawned and back into the game saying you killed somebody. It can just be a smaller message.
And again, that sound feels really good, and then you don't have to feel quite so bad about just dying.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I still got him, so it was worth it.
Yeah, exactly. And you feel that way anyway, but you have to read it on the screen right now, whereas with the chime... Anyway, the point is that you can use sounds to cover things that would be displayed on the HUD for messaging and stuff like that. I think
there's another advantage to sounds, and that is that sounds are much more immediate.
Yeah.
Right? So I have to read and interpret a message, whereas when I hear a sound, my brain and my emotions like automatically process that immediately. That's why the chime sound in Quake feels so great. It's because like it conditions your brain to be happy about that thing just happening.
It's true.
Whereas reading a message is not as
right. Well, and that's why people like the kill rewards in UT, right? When you get a multi-kill and it says multi-kill.
Yeah, and there's a sound. It goes, Dah!
Yeah, then people are like, yes, I got a multi-kill. Or, monster kill.
Yeah.
Then, people are like, yes, I got a monster kill. But for individual kills in UT right now, there's not really a message. And it seems like some kind of sound would add positive reinforcement that was good.
Mm-hmm. But going back to the messages, because you do need messages, and you do need to show like player names. But I think there's a couple of principles, at least from my perspective, that I think make a big difference. The biggest one for me is there should not be anything anywhere close to my crosshair.
Yeah.
Okay? The crosshair is holy. Don't put things next to the crosshair. I use the crosshair for aiming, and I need to focus on that one specific point. And when you stick something else next to the crosshair, it makes it harder to focus on that one specific point that I need to be focusing on. So I remember in some of the games, when you moused over a player, it would show their name underneath of the crosshair. Hate that. No. I would much prefer to see it on the actual player themselves. But maybe not everybody feels that way. So maybe there needs to be some settings and so forth. And I know that, we're early on in the project, and so maybe a lot of those settings, unless somebody wants to do it, maybe I should do it. But I do think that cleanup needs to happen right now. I was playing Instagib because that's all anybody was playing this week, apparently. And I don't really like Instagib, but hey, it's good for your aim. And I'm trying to hone in my aim, and there's these messages showing up on my screen the whole time, throwing me off.
Yeah.
And on that note, I hate the default crosshair. I really want my green dot with a black outline. We've talked a lot about visual clarity, but we've always talked about it as it relates to the characters and the environment. I think that there also needs to be visual clarity of the HUD, and there needs to be visual clarity of the sounds.
Yep. I know in most of the UT games at this point, chat messages showed up on the left in the middle, roughly. Mm-hmm. I would like to see them go back to the corner. It was easier to keep them out of your way when you didn't care at all about them when they were up in the corner. And having them down on the side, it's kind of distracting. Now, I think you're right. There needs to be some discussion on how do we keep the HUD visually clear while also giving the correct amount of messaging. That's something that I don't think has really been discussed on the forums very much. I think some people have started threads, but they haven't really taken off.
And we've definitely mocked some HUDs as well.
Yeah. And by mocked, you mean made designs of, not made fun of.
Well, we did that too, but... All right. Something that they added was advantage time. This is a new mechanic related to halftime. So before, with halftime, it just ended. And if you had the flag, it sucked because it was halftime and whatever you were doing didn't matter. What they've done now is they've added advantage time. And this is kind of like in soccer, where if one team has the ball and they're about to score or whatever, the ref doesn't call the end of the half yet. And so it's the same thing. If you have their flag, the half does not end until you drop the flag or you capture. So if both flags are on the stand or both flags are taken, you don't get advantage time because neither team has an advantage. But if one team has an advantage, the half will continue.
Yep. We haven't tested with it a ton, other than to know that it's there and that there's way that it will end.
I've tested it with other players, but I haven't played like a full 5v5 with it yet.
So there's some details of that we don't necessarily understand, but as far as I think that the thing with this is that, again, we're focusing on the halftime thing again. And the question is, does halftime really make sense? What I believe Epic's goal with this is to turn Capture the Flag into a quote-unquote esport. The thing with the stream last week where they showed the logo, they talked a lot about how this logo evoked a sports feel and all this stuff. Their sense of this game is similar to, dare I say it, UT 2003, where they were trying to make it feel like more of a sport, quote unquote, sports game. Now, whether this is going to pan out ultimately in CTF is still a huge question mark. I mean, halftime has serious problems, and I don't know if they'll ever be able to overcome all those problems. If nothing else, the biggest problem with halftime right now is completely messaging. Everybody thinks the match is over when the half reaches, and they all quit the game. I mean...
or the players that know are... Every time that halftime comes in, there's a bunch of messages that come in through the game. I hate halftime. This is so stupid. Why is... Because you're in the middle of doing something, you're just barely getting into like the groove of the match, and then all of a sudden it stops you and puts you back in your base, and you're like, what the heck? I understand what they're trying to do with halftime. I like some of the ideas that they've been describing about like automated replays and giving time for people to organize their strategy and for commentators to commentate. And I would like to see that tested and to see how that actually works out. But I don't know if I'm going to get there. It just pisses me off so much every time that it happens. I just want it gone.
Right now, I think the biggest problem is just the way that halftime comes about doesn't really tell you what's happening. You switch sides of the map. Do you know that you switch sides of the map? You probably don't really know right now.
Yeah.
My guess is that they'll probably spend a lot of time over the course of building the game, tweaking it and making it how they think halftime should work before they decide whether halftime is going to stay or not. And so we're probably going to have to suffer through it even longer, whether you can stand it or not. But I mean, there's good arguments on both sides, and I think the problem right now is almost entirely messaging.
Yeah, well, and to the messaging part, like for me to describe to somebody else how advantage time works is, like it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Even when you've played through it, we had to tinker around with it a little bit to make sure that our understanding of it was correct. And I might have gotten something wrong, like I do with a lot of mechanics. So there's definitely some messaging that could be done better there, and in a lot of places in the game. But that's
well, and there's no real way to know right now. Am I doing something that gives me an advantage? I mean, if let's consider a scenario right currently where you have their flag off of the stand just barely before time runs out,
yep.
And then right after time runs out in advantage time, they pick up your flag. Is that you no longer have the advantage in the round ends?
I haven't tried that. I don't know what happens.
But this is just one of those things where it's like the details of how this works are hard to message. How do you message that? I think that's going to be a challenge they're going to face as they try to make halftime make sense. Whether halftime pans out the way it is right now, I don't know. Thinking about the way CTF worked in the past, halftime would make more sense as happening between the first two maps in a match. But in terms of how this plays out in a single map, I'm still confused.
Yeah. Last change that we want to talk about is that they added a dual game type. Now, it doesn't really actually do anything yet, but it's there.
Yeah, and I think that it's broken right now. I'm not exactly sure, but everyone has been playing two-player TDM to do one-on-ones recently as opposed to playing the dual game type. There's just some weird problems in there, and it obviously hasn't really received a ton of focus. The item spawns are all set to really low.
Since we can't play the dual game type, and here's the thing, we really have no clue where Epic wants to take the dual game type. Right now, all it does is it removes the redeemer, and it looks like it changes the timing of the power-ups. And right now, it's set to like 10 seconds, but that's probably just for debugging. We don't really know, because it really doesn't work. It's just a framework for it to be there. When I was at the Epic playtest, this seemed to be an area of the game that they were really, really interested in. And really, really interested in innovating with as well. So, and we talked about it in the podcast that I recorded while I was up there. Some of the ideas that were presented, ways to mitigate spawn killing, ways to help a player take away map control, things like that, stuff to try and make it interesting.
I believe, and this may be wrong, that Epic wants to turn Duel into something that's fun to play and fun to watch for anyone. Somebody could join into or open up the UT and just say, spectate me on a 1v1. They'd watch people play and they would enjoy it. This is something that's really popular in Dota 2 right now.
Yep.
And I've done this. Just run Dota 2, and there's 10 buttons in there where you can just join into somebody's game and watch them play and try to figure out all the different little things that they do. And that's the value to something like spectating a 1v1, is that you can watch how somebody that is relatively good at the game moves and shoots and collects pickups and all these different aspects of the game that you can learn by watching. And I think that's ultimately where they want to go with it. If there were a lot of people playing 1v1, then there would be a lot of people that understand the game. And if there were a lot of people that understand the game, then there'd be a lot of people to spectate. And if there's a lot of people to spectate, that gets people interested. And it's just kind of a good cycle to have. Now, the dual game type originated in UT with UT3. And in UT3, the way that it worked is you could have 10 people join a server, and it would round robin through the people that were in the server. It would have 2 people join in, they would play whoever won. The loser would get knocked to the end of the line, the next person in line would play the person that won, and it would just go through that cycle until it had determined a winner, whoever had beat the most number of people. Whether this dual game type is going to turn into that or not is questionable right now. UT3 wasn't popular, really, and the dual game type even less so. I think I almost never saw people playing dual, but I did play dual at least once.
Well, I think that this is a place where Epic could experiment. I mean, the thing is if they make some really drastic changes to duel and they suck, the guys that are really into duel, they can always just load team deathmatch and only put 2 players in and turn weapons stay off, and they're going to get what they had in past games, right?
Yeah.
I think that if there's any place in the game where you have leeway to make drastic changes to a game type, it's in one-on-one. I think that the appeal of one-on-one could be drastically improved, not just from the number of people that play it, but from spectating it too. I mean, Carmack said it in last week's episode that, you know what, watching 1v1 now, at least, watching it in retrospect, it's boring. He said it's 2 guys running around shooting shot combos at each other. And I would argue that it was just as bad in UT 2K3, 2K4, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it was Fatality and Compressed, where it was basically him spawn killing the other guy for half the time, and then when he finally couldn't do that, he would just go and find a little spot up in the rafters and hide there the whole game. Nobody wants to watch that. It's boring.
Yep.
People want to see action. And I think that we can give that to them. I think that UT provides that, and 1v1 can provide that, and still have all of the strategy and intricacies and high skill level that it's had in the past. And like I said, if we screw up, you can always just go back to the one-on-one in deathmatch.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, having it as its own game type that hasn't really been there in previous games, it's easy to work around playing with it, and they can make whatever changes they want to it, and if there's money tournaments involved, people will learn their rules, and if there's not, then people will play TDM with 2 players and have it the way they like it. So,
and Epic is definitely going to experiment with it. If you guys are upset about the changes that they've made to CTF, if you don't like what they did to halftime, I think you're definitely not going to like some of the things that they're going to try and duel. I heard some pretty heretical ideas presented in the discussion about duels. But you know what? I think that game type needs it. I think that we need to break it and find out where the limits are and what actually makes it suck and what will actually expand the appeal. And I really think that we can expand the appeal of this game type and make it a popular tournament game. Okay, so I want to close on something else related to this. If there's one thing that I took away from the Epic playtest, it was that Epic was willing to do anything that it took for this game to be successful. They're going to make this game successful come hell or high water. They'll do whatever it takes. And if that means killing sacred cows, they're going to do it. If that means swallowing their pride and abandoning an idea that they were really attached to, they're going to do it. They've already done it in the development of this game. They're going to make this game successful, and they want to bring new people into this game. After visiting headquarters, I believe that more people will play Unreal Tournament 4 than have played any of the other UT games combined. And these will be new players, people that have never played a UT game, possibly never even played an arena FPS before, right? So with that in mind, we want to do what those new players are going to enjoy. I think is ultimately what the goal should be. And if we do something that's really, really awesome, it doesn't really matter what it was in the past if those new players like it, because those new players are going to outnumber us 10-1.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the way the community is right now, it's small. The existing active UT community is...
UT4 community is, yeah.
Yeah, it's really small. In fact, it's easy to know every single person that plays the game right now. It's not challenging. And I think that right now that's kind of driving a bias of what happened in previous games. So people don't want to like a dual game type because it wasn't popular in UT3 for this reason or that reason. People don't want to like this movement mechanic, me included, because it wasn't like this in previous games. But if it brings in new players, who am I to say? If the changes are good and they make the game more fun and downplay quote-unquote bad mechanics of the past, that's an overall good thing. I think that this is going to become more challenging as time goes on. There's going to be changes that will happen that people really don't like because it's not how it was in previous games, but we're going to have to change our attitude towards a lot of these things. It can't just be, I liked it the way that I played it before. It's got to be, does this make sense to make the game more fun, to improve not just me playing the game and killing people, but people that are getting killed enjoying the game and people that are spectating enjoying the game. Those are things that weren't really big focuses in past games. It needs to be a focus now. There's other games out there where losing doesn't make you hate the game, where spectating doesn't get super boring. And if this game can't match up to those games, then it's not going to be successful. And we need to do everything we can to help it be successful. I think that's a big challenge right now. The community is going to have to step up even more and say, yes, it was this way in the past, but it doesn't make sense to keep it that way if we want to have a popular and successful game.
Yeah, it's not about dumbing UT down, guys, because there is a lot of room to make UT smarter, really, in the long run.
Yep.
These changes can add choices to the game, can give you more options, can give you more ways to differentiate yourself and become better and show that you're better from other players, right? So it's not about dumbing down the game, but it is about changing it to match the gaming world today. And that means that things will be different.
Yep. And we have to get used to it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is all we have time for this week. As always, like and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next week.